Hi, I'm Lyra and this is tropetrinitytrilogy, and today I will be reviewing Starlight, Hannah Lee Kidder's second short story collection. So Hannah Lee Kidder is an AuthorTuber, and I've recently been wanting to read more short stories, so I decided to give her collections a shot. Now, the first collection I read, Little Birds, which I will link the reviews for everywhere, I was not a big fan of, but can she redeem herself with her second collection? Let's find out. Little Bird's main issue I had with it was that it was boring and repetitive. However, with Starlight, it was advertised as being a bit more spooky, with dark fantasy and horror being incorporated in the story, which gave me hope that this collection would be more interesting. Now, like the last review, I will list the stories featured. However, this is a bit annoying because unlike the last ebook, this one didn't have a table of contents at the beginning, which I think is a mistake. I think every short story collection should have a table of contents, but I digress. So these are the stories. Sliced Ink, both of which I found meh. The Swamp Witch, which was the first one where I was like, okay, there's potential, continued, which was also kind of meh, but then it got back to being better with Warm, Margrove, which was my favorite, Bruising, Home, Mother, Starlit Shadows, White Rabbit, and Passing Ghost. Sir, I think you're purring too loud. You need to be less happy. You need to be less happy. You're too loud for the video. See, he's too happy. Can you hear this purring? I hope not, because he is loud. You're too happy, sir. You're too happy, sir. Be more depressed. Now, as I stated when listing them, the first two stories in this collection did nothing for me. The first was spooky gore that lacked character depth that I needed, and I think it was considered a flash fiction, so that might just be a genre issue. And then the second one was definitely really short, and it was more of just a scenario with a character. And again, I didn't find it particularly unique enough or interesting enough for me to be entertained by it or interested by it. So I was worried reading those stories that I would feel the same way about this collection.
Then everything changed when the
Swamp Witch
attacked.
Swamp Witch is a cool, imaginative story with a unique protagonist and a strong sense of setting. And an actually pretty interesting story that did feel like a complete story. And besides one other flash fiction, after that I enjoyed pretty much every other story in the collection. So though this was a story that got me into the collection, I do think it's a fun, enjoyable story, and it does have kind of like who's really the monster thing going on. I think it does it well, and I also think it had really good descriptions in the story that I really appreciate. Like they were very well done and I enjoyed them. Then another story I specifically want to point out is Margrove, which was my favorite story in the collection. It's a historical fiction, I believe, about two sisters who live with their abusive mother, and they're trying to earn money to leave by putting on fake seances where one sister is the one speaking to the ghost and the other one is pretending to be their deceased grandmother. And I really enjoyed this story. I thought it was my favorite in the collection. I have a soft spot for sisters and stories in general. The protagonists, both sisters, were compelling with their own unique personalities and good and bad attributes. Again, it's like a really cool, unique premise, and I love sisters in fiction. So I really like this story. I even want to add a physical copy of this collection to my shelf so that I can just pick it up and read some of the stories if I'm in the mood for them, specifically Margrove, because that one I really enjoyed. And overall with this collection, I really enjoyed the fantastical elements and how they were mixed into the stories. Because with short stories, you don't really want complex world building with your fantastical elements. You want it to be more of a tool for the greater story. And I think this author did a great job of making them, you don't want them to feel like a tool though. So she did a good job incorporating them into the stories and making them interesting and compelling, but still having the characters be the heart of the story. And even the stories in this collection where there was no magic and it was completely realistic, I still found the situations compelling. And it's kind of funny because with Little Birds, one of my issues was that the themes and a lot of the emotional character struggles of being stuck in the past and loss and grief, I felt were repetitive. Like, that was one I got tired of. Whereas with this collection, I do think there's a repetitive struggle in it, and that is abuse. Almost all of these stories feature characters who are dealing with or have dealt with abuse. I think all of them but 3. However, despite the theme being used throughout almost all these stories, it never felt repetitive because the ways the abuse was conveyed throughout the story and the situations the characters got themselves into to deal with it, and the characters themselves and their thoughts were unique enough that instead of it being like, oh, another story with a character who's abused in some way, it was actually interesting. It was cool to see all these different situations of a similar struggle. So I think this collection is a good example of the similarity actually being well done and not taking away from the other ones, and instead being a great, well curated collection that made sense and was enjoyable. In fact, the 3 stories that didn't involve abuse were the ones I found the least interesting. All the other ones I really enjoyed because the premises for each story were unique enough that that one similarity didn't ever feel repetitive. It was enjoyable, as enjoyable as stories about abuse can be. These ones actually, though, I would say compared to Little Birds, had a lot more with happy endings. Little Birds, all of them kind of just left me feeling empty. Some of these do have nice triumphant endings. Also, this book kind of does something funny, and that is, while Little Birds, most of the stories in the collection had been previously published in magazines, so they were technically traditionally published first. And Starlight, I don't think any of them had ever been published in magazines, so all of them were self-published. The funny thing is, I enjoyed Starlight way more than Little Birds. And I have had this before. It's not that I've always traditionally published books better than self-published. That's not the case. I realize that doesn't necessarily denote quality, but I think that this is a great example of how it really doesn't necessarily determine the quality or enjoyment I'm going to get from a story, because I really enjoyed Starlight and all of it was self-published, and then a bunch from Little Birds were traditionally published, and I was like, not for me. So I think that the collections in comparison really demonstrates how you can't judge a book on how it's published. Also, as someone who's trying to get back into reading short stories, and if you are trying to get into short stories, I definitely recommend this collection, especially if you want to read a bit more fantastical short stories and then also some that are grounded. I think this is a great collection, and I genuinely really enjoyed it, and I'm glad I read it. Such a good boy. Thor says that he didn't like the story White Rabbit because there's dead animals in it, and he only likes stories where all the little animals live, because he's a little animal, and he's like, that's so scary. White Rabbit is so scary because animals die in it. Thor says no animals can die unless he's eating them, because he would eat a white rabbit if he was big enough. But right now I think all the white rabbits are bigger than him, so he is not going to be eating one anytime soon. I also think if you want to check out Kidder's writing, this is the collection to start with, because I think this is the superior one and I genuinely enjoyed it. So I hope you do too if you read it. Anyway, have you read this collection? What did you think of it? Do you agree or disagree with me? Have you read her other collection? Do you agree with my assessment that this is the superior one? Do you plan on reading this collection? Please let me know all your thoughts down below. Thank you for watching, and Thor and I will see you later.